Very good. Well, friends, we find ourselves back again in our studies in William Gurnall. You may recall that we're dealing with verse 16 of Ephesians 6 and have been for some time. Verse 16 says, above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. And in this particular section, which we've now reached, Gurnall is dealing with faith's power to quench what he calls pleasing or attractive or drawing temptations. Faith, he says, and Scripture says, enables the believer to quench the darts which Satan has dipped into the poison and which is so dangerous for us. Now, he deals with three specific areas, three specific sources of temptation. There's what he calls the lust of the flesh, then secondly, the lust of the eyes, and then thirdly, the pride of life. Now, we've already begun looking at the first of these. We finished, actually, it wasn't a particularly good place to finish, but anyway, we finished by last time introducing what he in Scripture calls the lust of the flesh. Now, what is that? That is just temptation which promises pleasure to us and to our flesh. So how does faith quench that type of temptation? How does it quench that type of fiery dart? Well, Gurnall begins answering that question by saying that faith strips away the veil from the eyes of the Christian so that they now begin to see sin in its nakedness, sin for what it is, before Satan is able to disguise it in one way or another. Now, Satan, of course, does do that. He disguises sin. But faith's eye sees through that disguise. It looks, as he puts it, behind the curtain of sense and sees sin before it's dressed for the stage. It sees sin for what it is, even before Satan is able to dress it up. And when he is able to dress it up, they are able to see through the costume. They see it, they see sin, he says, to be a brat from hell that brings hell hidden with it. Sin is seen as a brat from hell that brings hell hidden with it. So let Satan come and present sin and make it ever so attractive. By grace, the Christian says, I won't be cheated by a lying spirit. I see through this. I see it is not as you present it. Now, the costumes which make lust and sin so attractive are not its own. And he refers there to the woman of Endor. You remember that Saul consulted, and Saul was all disguised. But the woman saw through the disguise. Thou hast deceived me, she says, for thou art Saul, 1 Samuel 28. And in the same way, he says, faith calls sin and Satan, actually, by their own names, even when they're disguised. What a slight problem on the screen. Satan, you are Satan, says Faith. Why do you try to deceive me? Satan has said sin is bitter as gall and wormwood, and you cannot make me believe I can gather sweet fruits of true delight from your root of bitterness, or grapes from your thorns. You are Satan, says Faith. Why are you trying to deceive me? Because God has told me what sin is and what sin is really like. You can't make me believe. I'm going to read that bit again because it's very good. You cannot make me believe I can gather sweet fruits of delight from the root of bitterness, or gather grapes from your thorns. Faith then enables the soul to recognize not only the nature of sin, void as it is of true pleasure, but also the fleeting quality that sin brings with it. Faith it is that persuades us, that enables us not to give up God's sure mercy for Satan's temporary thrills. And he cites Moses running from the enchantments of the Egyptian court, where, well into affliction as it happens. Why? Because he knew that the pleasures of sin in Egypt were but for a season. Hebrews 11:25. And he has an illustration here. If you saw a man, he said, jump from a ship into the sea, well, at first you would think that person had something far wrong with it. But later, if you saw that man standing on the shore, and the ship in the meantime having sunk under the waves, you would say, wise man. Well, faith sees the world. It sees all the stimulus of sin. It's like that ship. It's going to sink sooner or later. There's a leak in it all, which even the wisdom of man cannot repair. Oh, it's better to swim, he says. Swim by faith, even if it's through an ocean of trouble, and get safely to heaven, than to sit in the lap of sinful pleasures until we drown in hell's gulf. Better to swim for safety. I don't know if you saw that young lad from Australia, that 13-year-old the other day that swam and brought help to his family. It was quite interesting. He said it was the Lord that enabled him to do it. I don't know anything more about it than that, but it just came to my mind at the moment, and it's there he is, he's swimming, and he's swimming for his own life and for the life of his family. And well, he reached the shore, and he reached help. Sin's enjoyment, you see, the believer comes to understand that sin's enjoyment can't last long. It's all very temporary because it's not natural. And whatever is not natural soon decays. The nature of sugar, for example, is to be sweet, and it holds its sweetness. But artificially sweetened, a wine, is the example that he gives, loses its good taste in a few days. Well, the pleasure of sin is foreign to its nature and corrupts the life it touches. None of the sweetness which now satisfies the sinner will be tasted in hell. Only bitterness will be in the cup there. Now, he has one more point before we leave this. No, he actually has two. Well, here's the first one. Another reason that sin's acceleration, sin's the excitement of sin, another reason that it must be short-lived is that life itself isn't very long in any way, and they both end together. They both end together. Pondered that as I was going through this week. Sin and life end together. Many times the pleasure of sin dies, of course, before the man dies. Sinners generally live to bury their worldly joy. The worm breeds in their conscience before it breeds in their flesh by death. But be sure the advantages of sin however long they last, will never survive this world. Hell's climate is too hot for evil's delights to survive. So then, faith is the wise grace which makes the soul consider how it will live in eternity. The fiery darts are quenched because the believer, by faith, through the illumination of the Spirit, sees sin for what it is, temporary, not really as it's dressed up for the stage, not really sweet, but bitter, with a sting in its tail. Now, of course, the unconverted man or woman, they don't see things like that. The carnal heart is all for the present. To quote Gurnall here, his snout is in the trough, and as he wallows, he thinks it will never end. But faith has a large stride. At one pace it can reach over a whole lifetime of years and see the end while they are only beginning. Psalm 119, verse 96. An end of all perfection I have seen, says David. And he pictures the wicked. They're thriving on their beds of sensuality, but how quickly cut down and burning in God's oven, as if it was already done. Psalm 37. And according to its strength, faith sharpens the vision of every Christian. For who envies the condemned man his feast on his way to execution? So it gives that understanding of sin, its temporary, fleeting in nature. But finally, faith outwits what Gurnall calls Satan's bargains by showing the soul where quality enjoyments are available at a more reasonable price. Customers shop, of course, where they find the best of what they want. And the principle holds true with sinners as well. The glutton where he finds the biggest platter, and the drunkard where he can find the best drink. But faith presents rewards to the soul which are beyond all compare, and it leads to the promise and entertains the believer there at Christ's expense, with every rich course the gospel affords. Faith then sets before the Christian a taste of that full supper that he will enjoy in heaven. And even this small sample, and that's all it is, melts into joy unspeakable and full of glory. Well, surely then this truth must quench temptation's appetite. Satan invites the Christian to his glittering orgy. The soul can say, will I give up these pleasures and corrupt myself with sin's mouldy bread? Well, he says, no, because that would make me like Judas, who rose from his master's table to sit at the devil's. He rose from his master's table to sit at the devil's. And we know what lay behind that. Well, the temptations which promise pleasure to the flesh, these fiery darts, are quenched by faith. Now, yes, I think we'll try the next one as well to make a bit of progress. He's dealt then with the lust of the flesh, that temptation that promises pleasure to the flesh. But then there's a second one, which is often mentioned in the same breath. That's what he calls the lust of the eye. Now, by that, the apostle means temptations that are drawn from the world's treasury. It's the covetous spirit that wants more. It's not particularly pleasure that these temptations are aimed at. It's getting things and getting more of them. and an unhealthy attitude towards them. And it comes, of course, to the eye, just as the eye might look on another man's wife, so the covetous eye looks on somebody else's belongings, and they want them. He references Ahab. You remember when he coveted Naboth's vineyard. He saw it and he wanted it. Now, says Gurnall, to add a few acres, to gain a few acres, didn't add much to a king's revenue. But he swims to it in the owner's blood. Only faith can permanently deal with this problem, can blind the eye that wants in that unhealthful way, and gives instead an insight into the sufficiency of what God gives. So how does faith quench what the eye wants in that way? Well, Satan lures the soul to venture out into lying and taking the wedge of gold. He says it's like a carrot dangled before a donkey. Satan comes along and he dangles these things, you see. But faith reminds the soul that they are under the promise of God's fatherly care, and that they do not need to be wanting in that way. It teaches the soul to say to these temptations, I am well provided for. I have promises about my provision. Satan, to quote Gurnall, I don't need your donation. Why would I play the thief for something which God has promised to give me? And that's why we read Hebrews 13. Let your conversation be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. How can you lack anything when God has promised in that way? Oh, the poor soul, the worldling will, they'll struggle to survive in Satan's worthless will. But Christian, you are free. You are free to live on the inheritance of your faith. So that's probably the main way in which that fiery dart is quenched. But there is another way in which faith quenches the lust of the eye. It's by teaching that our comfort ultimately comes from God's blessing and not from material abundance. Proverbs 28:20. A faithful man shall abound with blessings, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent. Faith warns us that if you heap up the world's goods in the wrong way, you're never going to get contentment. It's impossible to steal something and then ask God to bless it. Satan can't give you quiet possession of what you get by sin. He can tell you that you will, but he can't give you quiet possession of it. And neither can he quit you from the proceedings which God sooner or later will bring against you. So, faith then lifts the Christian to seek higher goals, higher blessings than this world has to offer. Faith discovers that its merchandise lies beyond the heavens, and it leaves the clay of this earth in order to trade for grace and glory, and it can bring its riches from far away. Then we read in Psalm 39, and I'm nearly finished. David brands the worldly man there as a fool, who troubles himself so much, really for nothing. He heaps up wealth, and he doesn't know who'll have it after he's gone. And then he turns his back on the world as not being worth his effort. And now, Lord, he says, what wait I for? My hope is in thee. David says, is this my prize? To get all of these things? To sit on a bigger collection of wealth than my neighbor has? Is that the pinnacle? Is that what I'm aiming for? Is that what I'm here for? No, verses 7 and 8 of Psalm 39. My hope is in thee. Deliver me from all my transgressions. Deliver me from these transgressions and from every temptation that comes from that direction. His attitude is this: let those who love the world take the world. But Lord, do not pay my wages in gold or silver, but in pardon of sin. So he's dealt then there with the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes. You'll know there's a phrase that comes immediately after that, the pride of life. And that's what he's going to deal with in the next one. They sometimes called the sinful trinity. And we have the third one yet. And we'll take that up on the next occasion if we're spared.